Hello and welcome to Walk the Talk. I am Shekhar Gupta in a surprisingly clear afternoon. And my guest today, Achim Steiner, head of UNDP. Welcome to Delhi. We organize this weather for you. We organize this please. We don't want you to come to Delhi and go back with such a bad impression of our time.
No country has completely eliminated pollution, but the price we pay today, what the World Health Organization tells us every year, that over 7 million people die prematurely and over 4.5 million as a result of air quality issues, clearly shows that there is still a major problem. But in many parts of the world, the cleaning up is happening. It is partly because regulations are put in place, timelines are put in place, and also new technologies come into the market. New mobility concepts are there, renewable energy technology, a change in land use and land use management. I mean, the factors that drive pollution in cities in Asia, South Asia, Latin America and North America are different, but they are, at the end of the day, manageable because we choose to tackle them. Pollution is also a sign of asking society to pay a price that some will pay more than others. Remember, in the industrialized world, very often the wealthy lived upstream of the factories because the wind would push pollution downstream. So it's a mixture of rapid growth, not deploying the technology.
In India, the rich have moved to Goa.
Well, that may be the case, but I think many also in New Delhi now would consider themselves to be wealthy sufferers of pollution. Pollution has become unacceptably high, and yet also people are saying it's not the inevitable price for development.
So speak from your experience of 10 years. How amenable did you find governments when you raised this issue?
Increasingly amenable, where basically politics felt the pressure of the street. When people are no longer willing to accept this, governments begin to act, and this is across the world, whether you look to China, whether you look to the United States, whether you look to Europe. Even now in Europe we are discussing in the country that is, in a sense, the center of modern automobile construction and industry, the big debate about diesel engines. And what is interesting is that in Germany, just in the last 2 years, the discussion has moved from, electric mobility maybe next century, to actually maybe producing the last of the combustion engines somewhere around 2030, because the world is moving to an entirely new technology platform. That's how quickly things can change.
And they are changing.
And they are changing, absolutely.
So I'm interested in what you said just now. You said politicians, the governments respond to the pressure of the street. Do you get the sense that we are doing enough on the street in India?
Well, look, every newspaper I would open today in India, every magazine...
As an air purifier ad.
Well, there is always a commercial success story to every problem, but the public debate is very much alive. I think governments, local governments, mayors are seized by it. Industry is also feeling the pressure because industry and manufacturing must be part of the solution. The question is, governments have a key role to play to orchestrate an accelerated response, and I think this is partly where there has to be a consensus that essentially makes it possible for captains of industry, local government, national, federal government to come together and say, this is the plan for moving us to the next stage. And I think it has already begun in India.
Do you have a list of 3 or 4 or 5 things? You know the climate of India, you know the problem. Things that India could do on priority.
Set clear targets. If you don't set targets, you don't create accountability.
So air quality targets?
Air quality, emission, pollution levels that have to go to the source. You see, we try to manage pollution too often at the tail end. Where we have to go is at the source of pollution, whether it's in air, in water, in soils. If you go to where that pollution is created, you have a much cheaper option for actually reducing it also. So set targets at the source of pollution. Secondly, timelines by which it is met. Secondly, identify the technology opportunities that are available and create the kind of public policy that creates incentives, tax breaks and so on to accelerate the deployment of technology. And thirdly, start working with the users of the services that ultimately drive this pollution, like mobility. Can a city such as New Delhi, Mumbai, Berlin or Beijing move to a completely different set of transport and mobility systems where we maybe need 1/5 of the vehicles in the future to transport as many people as quickly and conveniently as others.
But we have other issues also. For example, I don't know, you must have heard of the problem of stubble burning. Absolutely. North of India and Pakistan, because winds don't follow any border controls. So dust storms arrive from Saudi Arabia, then Pakistan is stubble burning at that time, that gets added, then we burn our stubble, that gets added, and that then ruins the air quality, not just in Delhi, Delhi is just an issue, all over North India. Varanasi, a Prime Minister's constituency, is usually much worse than Delhi.
You know, as so often in this particular instance, stubble burning is a cheap option for farmers to basically deal with what's left over after harvest. So if the problem now becomes so significant, then the obvious thing is to go back and ask what would make farmers stop doing this. Is it just a law that prohibits it? Maybe that is difficult in the short term. Are there incentives we can offer them? Because it is also a matter of helping a poor economic enterprise to deliver a service that has a public good and a common good. So there are different approaches to this, that government has both the legislative power and the executive authority to implement. And I think that way you go up each supply chain of pollution and find solutions. It may be that you know, the solution may also be in a form of land use that can be encouraged with extension services. The solutions are multiple, but they will not happen if the incentives are not in place to act. And sometimes there may be hard regulation. More often the more intelligent one is, how do I make somebody do something differently, because it's also in their interest.
So do bureaucracies in countries like ours ask you the right questions? I'm still holding you in your previous job. We haven't come to the current one. Or do they duck the key questions?
What bureaucracies in countries we work with as the United Nations do not welcome is postulating and proselytizing. So I think a UN program, be it the Environment Program, the Development Program, is not needed in India in the year 2017 to say we have a problem with pollution. The question is, what are practical solutions? What can we learn from others? What kind of partnership can you develop with us to make it happen?
What kind of help can you bring?
Well, first of all, we can bring the lessons that have been learned by other countries. I mean, we are engaged in 170 countries. We have learned in Europe what kind of pollution measures work. For instance, in terms of EU standards for vehicle emissions. We have looked at Chinese cities and the policies that have led to a significant reduction in pollution levels by bringing other energy forms in. We also look at market mechanisms that create the incentives, for instance for farmers to practice different land uses. That experience is one that can be a shortcut for India to look at and then say, well, this is a menu of options that we can translate here. Just like India did, for instance, when it came to Brazil and President Lula's social policies of leaving no one behind in Brazil. India in part studied that and then combined it with its own technology platform and universe to take these kinds of policies into the digital economy age. That's how development happens, with ideas coming together.
Technology platform, you mean Aadhaar?
Yes, for instance, the whole biometric platform, which in turn is a remarkable development story unfolding in India, which many governments in the rest of the world are interested in. So again, by UNDP being a partner to India in its own national development thinking, we also have the ability, together with India, and in terms of our work, to share some of these lessons with other governments who are looking at e-government platforms as a way of doing business.
UNEP just made big news in India, big headlines. Unfortunately, after you've grown out of it, because they gave a big certificate to one of our little towns in Kerala, a town of what used to be called Alapura, for its waste management. It's now being
I read about it.
Set as an example for the rest of the world. Are you familiar with it? Do you know
Not
how
so
the
familiar.
towns got rated like that? And how do you do these ratings and how useful are they?
Basically what we often do in the United Nations, for instance in UNEP you have the Champions of the Earth program, is we look for stories of people or institutions that went against the grain of what is accepted wisdom. Very often economics is invoked, technology is invoked, oh, you can't ask poor people to do something like this, and we like to profile people who actually prove that the impossible is possible.
Human development, we are still struggling, like I said here, about. First of all, do you think these are fair, these ratings? And second, what can India do to improve it?
Let me first of all say that every rating is an approximation of reality. So if somebody wants to challenge the ratings on the detail, I think they will always find a reason to question. Well, that is your word, but by analogy. I think what the Human Development Report did over a decade and a half, 2 decades ago, is to first of all challenge the notion that progress and success in development is defined by GDP and economic growth alone. That was its big contribution. In then trying to make it more relevant, it was also asked to apply a lens on national performance. And here I can assure you that with every year that UNDP launches its report, there is a good group of countries that feel extremely upset, and another group of countries that in the year before were very upset are now extremely happy because they have changed rankings. I don't want to overrate the rankings, but let me be honest and frank. The attention that the ratings get are in some ways the proof that they're actually worth having, because governments, for many reasons, just like we as individual human beings, we pay attention to how we are performing. And you know, India's position in these ratings and rankings, I don't even wish to judge in terms of its accuracy as it would be viewed from the government perspective. The fact of the matter is that in developmental terms, India, by its own statistical and policy and public debates, would not negate the challenges that are in part reflected also in the rankings. This Prime Minister has made it a priority of his administration, of his government, to address some of these issues. So I think let's get less upset about the fact that there is an index out there that seems to indicate challenges.
I'm just upset that we have some poor rankings. I'm not saying these are unfair. I just wish that our country had better rankings.
But there are only two solutions to that. One is to improve India's own development performance, or to expect the others to come down. And I hope it's the former rather than the latter.
Well, I don't think others will listen to us on the downside.
Yeah. But let me say also, I mean, India has also challenges on a scale that are often not comparable to other nations. And I, for one, believe that in India we see an enormous will and commitment in a long tradition already of a socially minded historical approach to development, its constitution, but also now a new attempt at accelerated economic growth, but not at the expense of addressing poverty and inequality. Just a few weeks ago, we celebrated World Toilet Day, and outside the United Nations in New York on First Avenue was a giant blown up white toilet seat. And some people said, how can you put something like this in front of the United Nations? This is not appropriate. I would argue, absolutely, because the amount of conversation that toilet seat caused in front of the United Nations, maybe of people who would never have anything to do with the United Nations, just to learn why do we actually have a World Toilet Day, is because there are literally hundreds of millions of people who do not have the privilege, the luxury, or just the basic facilities in terms of their public hygiene. I think this is something that we in the United Nations have an obligation to both draw attention to and then provide support to countries to address this.